Her billionaire husband danced with his mistress first. She walked out like a true queen. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The night Naomi Brooks learned her marriage was over, no one raised a voice, no glass shattered, and no one had to say the word betrayal, because the whole ballroom watched it happen in perfect silence. The Grand Aurelia Hotel glittered above Fifth Avenue like a palace built for people who had never been asked to prove they belonged. Crystal chandeliers poured warm gold across the marble floors. Violins breathed softly from a balcony wrapped in white roses, and 400 guests in tuxedos and silk gowns moved through the ballroom with the easy confidence of old money. It was the annual Whitmore Foundation Gala, the kind of event that made headlines by morning and rewrote reputations before midnight. For Naomi, it was supposed to be a celebration. She stood near the entrance in a midnight blue gown she had designed herself, the fabric falling over her deep brown skin like quiet water under moonlight. It was elegant, not loud. Strong, not desperate. Around her neck rested a simple diamond pendant Alexander had given her on their second anniversary, back when his hand still found hers in crowded rooms, back when he still looked at her as if she was the only person who could calm the storm inside him. Tonight, she had believed he would honor her. For 7 years, she had stood beside Alexander Whitmore while he built Whitmore Holdings into one of the most powerful private empires in America. She had hosted dinners when investors doubted him, redesigned foundation spaces when donors complained, sat beside his mother through long hospital afternoons, and smiled through rooms where women studied her hair, her voice, her skin, and her silence as if trying to decide which part of her they disliked most. Naomi had never asked to be adored by society. She had only asked her husband not to leave her standing alone inside it. Across the room, Alexander looked flawless beneath the ballroom lights, tall and composed in a black tuxedo, his silver cufflinks catching tiny sparks of light each time he lifted a glass. At 39, he carried power like other men carried a watch, naturally, carelessly, almost without thinking. His pale blue eyes moved over donors, senators, and executives with practiced warmth, but when they passed Naomi, they did not stay. Beside him stood Madison Vale in a champagne-colored dress, laughing softly at something he said, one gloved hand resting too comfortably on his sleeve. Naomi saw it. So did everyone else. A whisper passed near the floral arch. "That's Madison Vale," someone murmured. "I thought she and Alexander were just business partners." Another voice answered, lower, crueler. Maybe Mrs. Whitmore should have thought about what kind of world she married into. Naomi did not turn. She had learned long ago that dignity sometimes meant refusing to give small cruelty a stage. Then the master of ceremonies stepped onto the platform and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before dinner is served, Mr. Alexander Whitmore will open tonight's first dance, a tradition of gratitude, legacy, and love." Applause rose like a soft tide. Naomi's heart moved before her body did. Her fingers brushed the wedding ring on her left hand, and for one fragile second, she remembered their first dance years ago in a rented hall in Brooklyn, when Alexander had whispered, "No matter where life takes us, I will always choose you first." The orchestra began a slow waltz. The spotlight found Alexander. Naomi lifted her chin, waiting for his hand. But Alexander did not walk toward his wife. He turned, smiled for the cameras, and offered his hand to Madison Vale. The ballroom inhaled. Madison's smile bloomed like a secret finally made public. She placed her hand in his, and together they stepped into the center of the floor while Naomi remained at the edge of the light, still as a queen carved from midnight and pain. Every camera turned. Every whisper sharpened. Alexander's hand settled at Madison's back, respectful enough for public eyes, intimate enough to wound. Naomi felt something inside her go quiet. Not break. Not yet. But close like a door that had waited too long to be protected. The music swelled, beautiful and merciless, while her husband danced with another woman first. The first turn of the waltz felt endless. Naomi watched Alexander guide Madison across the marble floor with the same calm precision he used in boardrooms, measured, polished, impossible to accuse without sounding wounded. That was the cruelest part. Nothing he did was loud enough to be called scandal, yet everything he did was clear enough to be understood. Madison tilted her face toward him beneath the chandelier light, her champagne dress catching gold at every seam, and the cameras followed them as if the story had already chosen its heroine. Around Naomi, the room rearranged itself in whispers. A senator's wife lowered her eyes with false pity. A magazine editor pretended to study her program while angling her phone for a better shot. Two women near the champagne tower spoke just softly enough to be overheard. "Poor thing," one said. "She must have known this was coming." Naomi kept her shoulders straight. She had survived colder rooms than this one. She remembered the first Whitmore family Christmas, when Alexander's aunt had asked whether her parents were comfortable with formal dinners, as if Grace belonged to a zip code. She remembered the charity luncheon where a donor assumed she was staff and handed her an empty glass. She remembered Alexander seeing it, hearing it, and choosing afterward to say, "They are old-fashioned, Naomi. Do not take everything personally." At the time, she had forgiven him because love can make excuses sound like peace. Now, as he smiled at Madison in front of 400 people, Naomi understood that every silence had been a rehearsal for this humiliation. The orchestra softened into the second movement, and Alexander's gaze finally found her over Madison's shoulder. For half a breath, something uncertain crossed his face. Not remorse, not fear, only the irritation of a man, realizing a private disrespect had become public. Madison noticed his glance and followed it. Her smile sharpened. When the dance ended, applause rose politely, unevenly, the kind of applause people offer when they know they have witnessed something ugly but still want dessert served on time. Alexander released Madison's hand and turned toward a cluster of donors, already recovering the room with charm. He did not come to Naomi. Madison did. She moved through the crowd like a woman walking across a stage built for her entrance, stopping close enough for Naomi to smell the expensive gardenia in her perfume. "You look beautiful tonight," Madison said, her voice sweet enough to hide the blade. "Midnight blue is brave. Most women would have chosen something more noticeable for a night like this." Naomi looked at her calmly. "I was not trying to compete." Madison gave a soft laugh, glancing toward Alexander. "Some women are born for the spotlight. Others are simply invited to stand near it." The words landed, not because they were clever, but because the room wanted them to land. Naomi felt the eyes gathering again, hungry for a reaction, for tears, for a raised voice, for proof that she could be reduced to the angry woman they already expected her to become. She gave them none of it. Instead, she reached to her left shoulder and unfastened the small platinum Whitmore pin Alexander's mother had given her years ago, the family crest shaped like a rising falcon. Naomi had worn it tonight out of loyalty. Now it felt heavier than metal. She placed it gently on the nearest cocktail table beside a half-filled glass of champagne. The tiny sound it made against the wood was almost nothing, yet Alexander heard it. Across the room, his head turned. Naomi did not look back. She gathered the hem of her gown with one hand, lifted her chin, and began walking toward the ballroom doors. The whispers followed, but they no longer touched her. For the first time that night, the crowd was not watching a woman being abandoned. They were watching a woman choose herself. Naomi did not hurry. That was what everyone remembered later. She crossed the ballroom as if each step had been measured by a quiet truth no one else was brave enough to say aloud. Behind her, the orchestra began another piece, softer this time, as though music could politely cover the wound Alexander had opened in public. Cameras lowered. Conversations paused. Even the women who had whispered about her now watched with uncertain faces, because Naomi was not giving them shame. She was giving them grace, and grace made cruelty look smaller than it already was. The hallway outside the ballroom was lined with tall mirrors framed in antique gold, each one catching a different version of her as she passed. In one reflection, she saw the wife who had arrived believing this night might restore something fragile between them. In another, she saw the girl from Brooklyn who had once worked 3 jobs while building a design portfolio from secondhand furniture and borrowed textbooks. In the last mirror, nearest the elevator, She saw only a woman in midnight blue with steady eyes and a wedding ring that suddenly felt like a question. Her hand rose to it, but she did not take it off. Not there. Not as a performance. Some endings deserve privacy, even when the betrayal had not. A young server near the service corridor turned too quickly, startled by the silent storm moving past him, and a silver tray tilted in his hands. 2 glasses slipped, spilling sparkling water across the polished floor. His face went pale. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, bending down at once, his voice shaking with the fear of someone who could not afford one mistake in a place like this. Naomi stopped. For a moment, the pain in her chest had nowhere to go. Then she knelt carefully, gathering a linen napkin before the water could spread toward the hem of her gown. "It is all right," she said gently. "No one was hurt. They will fire me," he whispered, glancing toward the ballroom doors. Naomi looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a boy barely older than 20, wearing shoes that had been polished but not replaced, trying to survive a room that measured people by the labels they wore. She remembered being measured that way. She remembered smiling through it. "What is your name?" she asked. "Caleb." "Caleb, one spilled tray does not define you. Do not let one cruel room make you forget your worth." His eyes widened, not because the words were grand, but because she had said them while her own world was burning quietly behind her. Naomi stood, handed him the damp napkin, and continued toward the lobby. Outside, New York was cold enough to make her breath visible. The Grand Aurelia's doorman reached for the Whitmore Town car waiting beneath the awning, but Naomi lifted one hand. "Not that one." He hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore, your driver is right here. I will take a cab." The doorman studied her face and, to his credit, asked nothing more. Yellow headlights slid along Fifth Avenue. Naomi stepped past the black car Alexander had sent for appearances, past the driver who already knew too much and understood too little, and raised her hand for a taxi. Inside her small clutch, her phone buzzed again and again. Alexander, then his assistant, then a message from an unknown number with a gossip blog link already forming its headline. Naomi ignored them all until she was seated in the back of the cab, the hotel shrinking behind her in the rear window. Only then did she open Alexander's name and type one sentence with fingers that did not tremble. "You chose your first dance. I choose my last goodbye." She sent it, turned off the phone, and gave the driver an address in Brooklyn that Alexander had never bothered to learn. By morning, the world had done what the world always does with a woman's pain. It had turned it into a headline. Naomi woke in her mother's old apartment in Brooklyn to the pale winter light pressing through thin curtains and the smell of coffee drifting up from the deli below. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then she saw her midnight blue gown folded over the back of a kitchen chair, her heels placed neatly beside a stack of unopened mail, and the silence returned with perfect clarity. Her phone, still turned off, sat on the small wooden table where her mother used to sort coupons on Sunday afternoons. Naomi reached for it only after washing her face, changing into a cream sweater, and tying her hair back with the calm precision of someone preparing for difficult weather. When the screen came alive, it filled with missed calls, messages, news alerts, and photographs from the gala. Alexander and Madison beneath the chandelier. Alexander and Madison mid-waltz. Naomi standing at the edge of the room, still and alone, cropped by strangers into a symbol they thought they understood. One headline read, "Forgotten Wife Walks Out of Whitmore Gala." Another asked, "Is this the end of New York's most polished power marriage?" Naomi set the phone down before the words could find a permanent place inside her. Across Manhattan, Alexander sat at the head of a glass conference table while his public relations team tried to turn humiliation into strategy. "We can call it a foundation tradition," one consultant said. "A sponsor dance. Nothing personal." Alexander stared at the city below his office window, jaw tight, phone in his hand, Naomi's message still open. "You chose your first dance. I choose my last goodbye." He had read it 17 times and still had not found a way to make it sound less final. "Where is my wife?" he asked. No one answered quickly enough. His assistant finally said, "She did not return to the penthouse, sir." Something in the room shifted, but Alexander covered it with coldness. "Then find out where she is." By noon, Naomi was sitting across from Grace Monroe in a quiet law office on Madison Avenue, far from cameras and marble ballrooms. Grace was in her late 50s, silver-haired, composed, with the kind of eyes that had seen too many women mistake endurance for love. She did not offer pity. Naomi respected her immediately. "Tell me what you want," Grace said. Naomi looked at the papers on the desk, then at the city beyond the window. "Peace." Grace nodded as if peace were a legal claim worth defending. "And from the marriage?" "Nothing that was not mine before him. I want Brooks' design studio untouched. I want my personal accounts separated. I want my name back." Grace studied her for a long moment. "You understand he may expect anger. He may even prefer it. Anger gives powerful men something to manage." Naomi's mouth curved faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Then I will not. Give him something easy." Grace leaned back, folding her hands. "Good. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes justice is a woman refusing to remain available for disrespect." The sentence settled in Naomi like a lamp being lit in a dark room. She signed the first authorization forms before sunset. No trembling, no dramatic speech, just ink moving across paper with quiet finality. That evening, a courier arrived at Whitmore Holdings with a sealed envelope. Alexander opened it alone in his office, expecting demands, threats, some emotional fracture he could use to convince himself she was being impulsive. Instead, he found a petition for divorce, clean, precise, already signed by Naomi Brooks Whitmore in black ink. Beneath the signature, she had left no note, no accusation, no plea. The empty space was what unsettled him most. For the first time in 7 years, Alexander realized Naomi's silence no longer belonged to him. Naomi did not become powerful overnight. There was no sudden inheritance, no miraculous investor, no headline announcing that pain had turned into fortune before breakfast. Her rebuilding began in a rented studio above a bakery in Brooklyn, where the heat clanked through old pipes, the windows rattled whenever the subway passed 3 blocks away, and the smell of fresh bread arrived every morning before the courage did. She painted the walls herself in a soft, warm white, assembled second-hand drafting tables with scratched corners, and wrote Brooks' Design Studio on the glass door with gold vinyl letters she ordered online for $38. It was not glamorous, but it was hers. In those first weeks, she woke before sunrise, answered emails with coffee cooling beside her laptop, and took projects the old Naomi Whitmore might have been told were too small for her attention. A reading corner for an underfunded elementary school in Queens. A quiet room for nurses at a community clinic in Harlem. A waiting area for a legal aid center where mothers came with tired children and folders full of hope. Naomi listened before she designed. She asked what made people feel safe. She asked where the light hurt their eyes, where the chairs felt too cold, where a child might hide when the world felt too loud. She remembered how it felt to stand in a beautiful room and feel unwanted. So she made rooms that welcomed people before anyone spoke a word. At night, when exhaustion settled into her shoulders, she sometimes touched the pale mark where her wedding ring had been. Not with regret, exactly. More like studying the outline of a life that no longer fit. Grace Monroe called twice a week, not only as her lawyer, but as someone who understood the strange grief of choosing peace and still missing what you had to leave behind. Healing does not always feel like freedom at first, Grace told her one evening. Sometimes it feels like an empty apartment with the right key in your hand. Naomi carried that sentence with her. Across the East River, Alexander discovered absence as if it were a new language he had never learned to read. At Whitmore Holdings, meetings ran smoothly but felt hollow. The foundation board approved donations, but the projects lacked the human detail Naomi had always protected. No one remembered that the children's shelter needed soundproof walls because the little ones were frightened by sirens. No one noticed that the Veterans Center should have chairs with arms so older men could stand without embarrassment. Alexander had once called those details sentimental. Now donors asked why the foundation's newest spaces felt expensive but cold. Madison still appeared beside him at events, polished and smiling, but the attention she had fought for began to feel thin. She knew how to pose for cameras. Naomi had known how to build trust. 6 months passed. Spring loosened the city. A local newspaper published a small feature about the Queen School reading room Naomi had redesigned with donated materials, warm colors, and shelves low enough for every child to reach. The article was meant to fill a Sunday community section. By Monday morning, it had been shared thousands of times by teachers, parents, and people who believed kindness could be practical. Then came calls from hospitals, nonprofits, and eventually the Committee for the National Humanity in Design Awards. They wanted Brooks Design Studio to create the stage environment for their annual ceremony at the Grand Aurelia Hotel. Naomi read the email twice. The same hotel, the same marble floors, the same ballroom where strangers had watched her lose a marriage. For a long moment, she stood in her small studio while sunlight moved across the floorboards. Then she opened a fresh sketchbook and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. A room can wound, but it can also heal. Naomi returned to the Grand Aurelia Hotel on a Thursday afternoon with a tape measure in her coat pocket, rolled blueprints under one arm, and no desire to be recognized. The ballroom was empty when she entered, stripped of music, flowers, cameras, and judgment. Without the gala crowd, it looked almost innocent, just marble, chandeliers, and high-arched windows catching soft spring light from Fifth Avenue. Still, her body remembered. The place where Alexander had stepped past her, the path she had taken toward the doors, the cocktail table where the Whitmore pin had touched wood with a sound only a broken heart could hear. For one breath, the old pain rose. Naomi let it come. Then she opened her sketchbook. The awards committee had asked for elegance, but Naomi gave them something deeper. She designed the stage as a garden of human dignity, with warm amber lighting instead of harsh spotlights, curved seating instead of rigid rows, and a backdrop made from translucent panels etched with words gathered from children, nurses, teachers, and shelter residents who had used her redesigned spaces. Safe, seen, welcome, rest, hope. She placed no throne at the center, no grand staircase meant to make one person look higher than another. Every pathway led gently toward the stage, because Naomi believed honor should never require someone else to feel small. The hotel staff watched her work with quiet respect, especially Caleb, the young server from the night she left. He was now an assistant banquet manager, promoted after Naomi had written a private letter praising his professionalism. When he saw her measuring the distance between the stage and the first row, his face brightened. "Miss Brooks," he said, correcting himself with care, "it is good to see you again." Naomi smiled. "It is good to see you standing taller." Caleb looked down, shy but proud. "I never forgot what you told me." Neither had she. On the evening of the ceremony, the ballroom filled again with expensive fabric, polished shoes, and names that moved markets. But this time, the room felt different. Light rested softly on every table. The children's words glowed behind the stage like small lanterns. Naomi arrived not through the main staircase, but from the side entrance with her team, wearing an ivory dress with clean lines and no jewelry except small pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. She looked calm, not because life had spared her, but because she had stopped asking cruel rooms for permission to breathe. Conversations shifted when people recognized her. Some faces showed surprise. Others showed discomfort dressed as admiration. The same magazine editor who had angled her phone 6 months earlier now hurried forward with a smile too bright to be honest. "Naomi, your work is extraordinary," she said. Naomi accepted the compliment with grace, but she did not mistake attention for respect. Across the ballroom, Alexander stood near the sponsor table, frozen in a black tuxedo that suddenly looked less like armor and more like a cage. Madison was beside him in silver, beautiful as ever, but her smile tightened when she saw how the room turned toward Naomi without being commanded. Alexander watched Naomi speak with teachers from Queens, a hospital director from Harlem, and a mother whose son had learned to read in the corner Naomi designed. He saw people touch her arm with gratitude, not ambition. He saw laughter soften around her. He saw, too late, that Naomi had not borrowed his light during their marriage. She had been carrying her own. When the ceremony began, the host stepped to the microphone and thanked Brooks Design Studio for transforming the ballroom into a space that honored service rather than status. Applause rose, warm and full. Naomi stood from her table, not as someone's wife, not as a woman surviving whispers, but as the founder of something built from discipline, mercy, and vision. Alexander rose with the rest of the room, his hands coming together slowly. For the first time, he was not the man being celebrated. He was the man in the shadows, watching the woman he had failed become impossible to overlook. The applause faded into a low, respectful hum as the ceremony moved forward, but Alexander heard almost none of it. He sat at the sponsor table with his hands folded, watching Naomi speak with a group of teachers near the stage. She listened the way she had always listened, completely, without checking who else in the room might be more important. That was what he had mistaken for softness. He understood that now. Naomi had never been weak. She had simply refused to make other people feel small in order to prove she was strong. Madison leaned closer, her silver bracelet flashing beneath the amber lights. "You are staring," she said quietly, her smile fixed for the room. Alexander looked away from Naomi, but not toward Madison. "She built all of this." Madison gave a delicate laugh. "It is a ballroom installation, Alexander. Beautiful, yes, but do not turn it into a monument." He finally turned to her, and whatever she saw in his face made her smile falter. "That is exactly what it is," he said. "A monument to everyone I ignored when I thought writing checks was the same as caring." Madison's eyes cooled. "Careful. Regret looks terrible on powerful men." "No," Alexander said, his voice lower. "Regret is what is left when power stops being useful." For the first time that evening, Madison had no answer. After Naomi's brief remarks, the host invited guests to mingle before the final award. Naomi stepped onto the balcony for air, away from the warmth of applause and the careful praise of people who had once looked through her. New York glittered below, traffic moving along Fifth Avenue like thin red and white ribbons. She held a glass of water in both hands, letting the coolness steady her. The door opened behind her. She knew it was Alexander before he spoke. Some people entered a room with sound. Alexander entered with history. "Naomi." His voice was careful, stripped of the command she remembered. She did not turn at once. "This balcony is public." "I know." A pause. "I will leave if you ask me to." That made her look at him. 6 months ago, he would have assumed his presence was enough to keep any door open. Tonight, he stood several feet away, hands at his sides, pale blue eyes shadowed by something that looked less like pride and more like understanding. "Then say what you came to say," she said. Alexander swallowed. "I am sorry." The words were simple, too simple for the years behind them. Naomi waited. He seemed to know that a sentence would not be enough. "I am sorry for that night, but not only that night. I am sorry for every room where I let you stand alone. Every joke I dismissed as harmless. Every insult I called old-fashioned. Every time I made you explain pain that I should have been brave enough to recognize without instruction." Naomi's face remained calm, but her fingers tightened around the glass. The city wind moved softly through her hair. "You knew," she said. It was not a question. Alexander looked down. "Yes, I knew more than I admitted. And you chose comfort. I chose image. Approval. Control. I told myself silence was diplomacy. It was cowardice." The word hung between them, clean and difficult. Inside the ballroom, applause rose for another honoree, muffled by the glass doors. Naomi looked at the reflection of the lights behind him. For years, she had dreamed of hearing this honesty. Now that it had arrived, it did not undo the nights she had cried quietly in rooms he never entered. It did not erase the way Madison had smiled. It did not give back the younger version of herself, who kept believing love would teach him courage. "You did not lose me because of one dance, Alexander," she said softly. "You lost me every time you let me stand alone." His eyes closed for a moment, as if the truth had finally reached a place pride could not protect. When he opened them, they were wet but steady. "Can I earn even a small place in your life again?" Naomi looked at him then, not cruelly, not tenderly, but with the peace of a woman who had already walked through the hardest door. "Some doors close quietly," she said, "but forever." Alexander nodded once, accepting the sentence like a judgment he had written himself. Naomi set her untouched glass on the balcony table and went back inside, where her name was being called, where the light waited for her, and where she no longer needed anyone to choose her first. Naomi received the final award beneath the words her team had carved into light: safe, seen, welcome, rest, hope, and for the first time in months, the applause did not feel like noise. It felt like witness. She stood at the microphone, ivory dress glowing softly against the amber stage, and spoke not about success, but about responsibility. "A beautiful room is not enough," she said, her voice calm across the ballroom. "A room should make people feel they can exhale. It should tell the tired nurse, the frightened child, the grieving parent, the overlooked worker, and the woman who has been made to feel invisible that they still matter. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Then the applause came, deep and sustained, rising from teachers, doctors, donors, hotel staff, and even people who had once misunderstood her. Naomi did not search for Alexander, but she felt the room shift around him. Later that night, while guests praised the ceremony and cameras gathered near the exits, a publicist Naomi did not know approached her with a careful smile. "There is a story circulating," the woman said, "about Madisonville. Messages, planned photographs, calls to gossip accounts. It appears she encouraged the coverage after the gala and tried to make the relationship look more serious than it was." Naomi looked past her toward the ballroom, where Madison stood alone near a floral arrangement, her silver dress bright but her face strained. For a moment, the old wound invited Naomi to answer with sharpness. One sentence from her would have been enough. The public was hungry. The blogs were waiting. The same cameras that once fed on Naomi's humiliation would gladly turn toward Madison's. But Naomi had learned that power becomes dangerous when it only imitates the people who hurt you. "I have no comment on Madison," she said. The publicist blinked, surprised. "None. None. People may expect you to respond." Naomi's expression remained gentle but firm. "People expected me to fall apart, too." By the next morning, the story broke without her help. Screens filled with speculation, timelines, and screenshots, but Naomi did not repost a single word. Instead, she announced the Brooks Humanity Rooms Initiative, a program to redesign waiting rooms, shelter lounges, school libraries, and family support spaces across low-income neighborhoods in New York City. The first funding came from the prize money she received that night. The second came anonymously, though Grace Monroe later confirmed what Naomi already suspected. Alexander had transferred a major donation through Whitmore Foundation with no press release, no gala photograph, and no request to attach his name to hers. When reporters asked him whether it was an attempt to win his wife back, he answered only once. "It is an attempt to repair the way I understood giving." It was the first honest public sentence Naomi had ever heard from him. Weeks later, in Grace's office, the divorce papers lay between Naomi and Alexander on a polished wooden table. There was no shouting, no final performance, no dramatic collapse of two people who had once promised forever. Madison was no longer part of his life. The gossip had burned hot and faded, as gossip always does. What remained was quieter and harder. 2 signatures. 7 years. A ring Naomi had placed in a small velvet box that morning. Alexander signed first, his pen moving slowly. When he slid the papers toward her, he did not ask her to reconsider. That restraint, more than any apology, told her he had finally begun to understand love as something other than possession. Naomi signed her name, Naomi Brooks, and the simplicity of it felt like sunlight through an open window. Alexander looked at the signature, then at her. "I hope the world gives you every room I failed to protect." Naomi closed the pen and met his eyes with peace. "I built them myself." Outside, New York moved on beneath a clean blue sky, but inside that office, a different kind of justice settled into place. Not revenge, not ruin, just a woman walking away whole, and a man finally learning that respect offered too late may still change him, even if it cannot bring her back. 1 year later, Naomi stood in the center of a room she had built for people who were tired of being unseen. It was not a ballroom this time, not a palace of chandeliers and polished judgment, but a renovated community center in Brooklyn with wide windows, warm maple floors, soft green chairs, and shelves filled with books children could reach without asking for help. On one wall, a painted mural showed open doors in every color of sunrise. Outside, February snow rested along the sidewalk, but inside, the building breathed with warmth. Mothers filled out housing forms at small round tables. A retired nurse taught a boy how to sound out difficult words. Volunteers carried boxes of donated coats into a storage room Naomi had redesigned, so no family would have to stand in line feeling exposed. Brooks Humanity Rooms had completed 12 spaces across New York City in its first year, each one practical, beautiful, and built from the belief that dignity should not be reserved for people with money. Naomi moved through the center quietly, adjusting a chair, greeting a teacher, laughing when Caleb arrived with trays of pastries from the Grand Aurelia kitchen. now as a banquet manager with a business card and a confidence that made him seem taller than ever. "You made it real," he told her, looking around the room. Naomi smiled. "We made it useful. That matters more." Later that afternoon, the city held a dedication ceremony for the center. There were no diamond donors seated above everyone else, no velvet ropes, no names carved larger than the mission. Grace Monroe stood near the front, silver hair shining beneath the skylight, watching Naomi with the proud stillness of someone who had seen a woman choose herself and then choose to serve others. Alexander came alone and stood in the back. He wore a dark overcoat and no expression meant for cameras. There had been no announcement that he would attend, no press release from Whitmore Foundation, no attempt to step into Naomi's light. He simply stood among teachers, parents, city workers, and volunteers, listening while the mayor thanked Brooks Design Studio for proving that beauty could be a form of care. When Naomi stepped to the microphone, the room became still. She wore a simple navy dress and her mother's pearl earrings. No wedding ring, no crest, no borrowed name. "There was a time," she said, "when I believed belonging was something another person could give me. A seat at a table, a hand extended in a crowded room, a name beside mine. But life taught me that belonging begins when we stop abandoning ourselves to stay where we are not respected." Alexander lowered his eyes, not from shame alone, but from recognition. Naomi continued, her voice steady and kind. "These rooms are for anyone who has ever walked into a place and wondered whether they were welcome. They are for the child who needs quiet, the parent who needs help, the worker who needs rest, and the person rebuilding a life they never expected to rebuild. May every person who enters here feel, before anyone says a word, that their life has value." Applause filled the center, not glamorous, not rehearsed, but real. After the ceremony, Alexander approached her near the mural. For a moment, they stood as two people who had once shared a home and now shared only the truth of what it had cost to lose it. "You were right," he said. "About rooms. About respect. About me." Naomi looked at him gently. "I hope you keep learning." "I will." He glanced around the center, then back at her. "You built something beautiful. I built something honest." He nodded, accepting the difference. There was no embrace, no promise, no return to what had ended. Only peace, which was harder to earn and more valuable than applause. As evening settled over Brooklyn, Naomi stepped outside and watched families leave through the center's bright red doors, children carrying books, mothers carrying forms, volunteers carrying empty boxes that had arrived full. Snowflakes touched her hair like small blessings. She was not the woman left standing at the edge of a dance floor anymore. She was not the forgotten wife, the whispered rumor, or the pain someone else had caused. She was Naomi Brooks, whole in her own name, walking forward beneath a winter sky that looked almost silver. Her story reminds us that dignity does not need to be loud to be powerful. When someone is disrespected, the highest response is not always revenge, but the courage to leave, heal, and build a life with meaning. Real love cannot survive without respect, protection, and the bravery to stand beside the person you claim to love. And sometimes the most beautiful victory is not watching someone else fall. It is refusing to let pain make you cruel, and choosing instead to become a place of light for others.